Welcome, everyone, to the Content Matters podcast. We are episode 2. Before we get started, and I introduce you to Scott, which probably a lot of you already know, I just want to thank our sponsor, Ingenious, for sponsoring the podcast, obviously. They're a provider of agile content management systems. They empower you to create really great content-driven experiences, whether it's for your website, for your customer portal, or some other channel experience you're trying to create. So if you're looking for content management, I'd recommend you give them a go. But let's put that aside and let's get to the really great stuff today. I am happy to bring Scott Brinker to the podcast, VP of Platform Ecosystem at HubSpot and the Chief Martech. And I don't know if anybody calls you the godfather of marketing technology or not, but to me, I've been following you long enough that's what I would call you anyway.
Yeah, and I always want to say, we should A/B test an offer they can't refuse.
Well, it's going to be a good conversation today. And like we were talking before we came live, there's lots of changes going on. So I'm sure we're going to get to some of those. But I think I would really like to start with kind of talking about the marketing tech stack overall. And obviously, there's lots of changes happening. Your work with the marketing technology landscape proves that it's growing and compacting in some areas and growing in others. And I just thought maybe it would be good just to get your view of what is changing kind of at a high level. What are you seeing?
Yeah, wow. Well, this is one of these questions. If you'd asked me a couple months ago, I would have had, hey, here's some really exciting things that are happening. But yeah, obviously, over the past couple months and even recently past few weeks, I think what everyone's talking about, rightfully so, is how these new AI interfaces, the sort of ChatGPT interface, if you will, is changing both the way marketers are going to be working with software and the tools that they use. But also, it starts to hint to changes that are likely to happen here for customers and consumers, and how do they want to interact with brands. So there's that, and I'm sure we'll talk more about that. But there's other exciting stuff that's been happening in the martech stack. One of the more exciting things that isn't AI has been really what I say is the unification of the data layer. For a long time, martech stacks were kind of in their own silo. They had their own contained data. If there was other data elsewhere in the company, it was usually somewhat difficult to be able to, swap stuff back and forth. And over the past several years, there's been some real maturity in cloud data warehouses, and now a bunch of the tools to make it easier to connect those cloud data warehouses to your operational systems, your operational marketing systems. I mean, the joke used to be that data warehouses was where data used to go to die, right? We'd feed stuff down to it. Most of the time, nobody would ever look at it again. Maybe in a few cases, some hardcore analyst might go hunting in and trying to find a pattern. But yeah, it wasn't really considered a part of, for marketers, most of their operational repertoire. But that's changed a lot. And so now, these things have terrible names like reverse ETL, but this idea of making it easy to pull data out of your data warehouse and feed it into frontline marketing systems, that's opening up a whole bunch of really exciting possibilities. So I don't know, let me pause there. You asked me about what's happening in martech stacks and I just start rambling for 3 hours.
But I agree with you. And from someone who's kind of myself, I pay attention to what's going on with the technologies. I keep hearing a lot about Snowflake and the integrations that are happening with Snowflake to kind of get the data in and get the data out of these marketing systems. And I agree, it used to be you would think, how do you use that tool, right? You need someone who's a super data scientist who's really smart and really knowledgeable and knows the ins and outs. But it sounds like it's getting easier to get that data and understand that data, whether you have that, data scientist in your background or not.
Yeah, and here's the really wild thing. So looking at, this evolution of connecting more and more data, across the company into marketing. But yeah, still it's in this warehouse. Still have to do a non-trivial amount of work to be able to, get it into your operational systems. And then there was this other thing about like, oh, AI and these new interfaces and whatnot. But one of the things we've now started to see in this AI space where things are moving so quickly is people using AI so that business users, or not general business users, even like the power user or sort of the ops savvy, business person can like now just make requests in plain language, natural language. And then there's tools now that are figuring out like, okay, well, this is how we can map that to where this data is here. And we can pull that data from there. And you want it in this format to this column. I'm seeing some of the demos of this stuff that's not science fair, like hypothetically, wouldn't this be cool if we could do this someday? I'm seeing some of the stuff like it's actually working today. And not that it couldn't get a lot better, but it's like, oh my goodness, this is a wild, wild time to be in marketing and on planet Earth.
Yeah. So, and I was reading your article on AI and composability, which is what you're talking about, right? And yeah, I understood it because I knew that ChatGPT lets people connect via AI, but I wasn't really thinking of what the scenarios would be. And then you started talking about Zapier and what the workflows. And I was like, holy crap, my job as a marketer has now changed dramatically. Like if I use HubSpot, for example, and I have to create a whole email campaign with workflows and emails and all that stuff, I can just tell the system to do it for me. And I mean, I always talk about the writers are at risk of losing their jobs, but so are, marketing operations has kind of a fear now too, because that's the job that they do, making all that stuff work together. That's kind of scary to think about.
No, I mean, well, this is again, like, historically when these disruptions happen, the historical economists and whatnot, have this very comforting story to tell of like, history has been, yes, an innovation comes along. It may displace a set of people doing a certain kind of work, but historically it's always then been replaced by like higher level jobs that essentially have raised, the economic value, of the population overall. But it's interesting that those things usually happened over like a generation, or like certainly like a decade or two. In this case, yeah, these changes, they're happening at a really rapid pace, and it's not clear how quickly we're all going to adapt. I mean, I will say, let me say one thing comforting, because there's plenty of stories you can read right now that will give you a hard time sleeping at night. So let me assure you of one thing that I think is really helpful, which is still almost all of these AI-powered tools, as miraculous as they are very task-based. It's about executing a particular task. We are still a long way away, knock on wood here, a long way away from the capability to like synthesize how all these pieces need to fit together, and the sort of that next level up of like the operations of your marketing team, your company, your the strategy you're using. That may change, but I don't think it's changing this year. So we've got at least some space where we can leverage these tools and still actually have a lot of value to bring in how we orchestrate them into our business.
Yeah, I think it just means, obviously, I agree with you 100%. Nothing's going to change overnight, and we can't bury our heads in the sand, though. We've got to pay attention to what's going on and see how it's changing. What does a marketer who's leading a team and running an operation in their company, what are the things that you think they should be thinking about? And not just necessarily with the AI and what's changing there, but what are the things that should be top of mind for them today and paying attention to? And the foundational stuff too, obviously, is very important.
Yeah, well, I guess there's a couple of things, and they do all entangle with each other. So, we were talking a bit about this, advancement on the data side of getting more and more data, having access to it. We're getting more powerful ways of mixing and combining data from different systems, across our business. I'd invest time in that because, again, a lot of these AI models, the general GPT model is fine for like sort of this general knowledge question. It's a little bit, I compare it to like the curator in Ready Player One. It's like, it's your walking Wikipedia, if you will. But it doesn't, those basic models, they don't have, anything specific about your customers, your business ops. But you have the ability in these models to connect your data sets, and if you have access to the data and you're able to explain the mapping of it, all of a sudden now you can start to harness these AI tools to really be able to take advantage of that. For some much more sophisticated analysis and, executional capabilities. So I think that's one thing, is getting your data house in order. There's plenty of work to be done there, and that's certainly going to benefit you with the AI evolution. The other thing that's a little bit further, I would keep an eye on it is, I'm sure a lot of, the listeners here, heard back in November, December, when OpenAI was being integrated into Bing and Microsoft was doing all these announcements. Google apparently had one of those oh crap moments, and they call it code red, and they're like, okay, we've got to figure this out, because their core search business could really be disrupted if people stop using Google search and instead start using these chat-based interfaces, as a way to get their answers. Well, I mean, if we're sitting back as marketers and thinking, wow, all right, well, good luck with that, Google. Hopefully you figure that out. It is in the context where for most digital marketers, Google has been the channel, for content marketing, for search engine optimization, certainly for, paid search marketing, all these things. And if that gets disrupted and people start using these other channels to engage with businesses, we need to keep our eye out on, for your particular business, your particular industry, how do you plug into that? And one example, so the big announcement this past week was ChatGPT released an initial set of plugins that augment ChatGPT with very specific functionality. Yeah. And some of the things these plugins were, there's a plugin for Expedia, so it can map finding, flights and hotels for you. Shopify, so you could plug into the merchant network. Instacart, so you could hey, tell me a recipe, ChatGPT. Okay, I'd like to make that. Can you go get the food for me? This is a whole new channel to market, and we don't know exactly how this is going to play out. So I don't have the answers, but I'm thinking if you're a marketer who's concerned about your digital channels to your audience, you want to be paying really close attention to this shift.
Yeah, absolutely. It's mind-boggling. I keep saying that. I'm mind-boggled most of the time. I'm like, oh my God, how do I keep track of it all? And I know I have to keep track of it all, but how do I do it? So yeah.
I wish I had good advice there. We were chatting before we went live here. I've got 50 windows open on my computer of the things I keep coming. Oh, I got to read this. Yeah, wait, what's going on with here? I got to read this. I can't even bookmark the stuff fast enough right now to keep up with this. So yeah, I empathize fully.
I know. I follow Paul Rutzer on LinkedIn, and it's thank God, because he'll put out a daily thing and list 5 different things that are news items for the day. And it's and I just click save. Okay. Because I know I had to go back and look at all that stuff. All right. Let's kind of shift a little bit and let's talk about platforms. Obviously, as the VP of Platform Ecosystems, you know a lot about platforms, and a lot of more vendors are shifting to using that term, that they're a platform, but platform doesn't mean today necessarily what it used to mean. So how do you term it, and what's kind of different about it now?
Yeah, so I have a software developer view of platforms. And to me, a platform is something upon which other companies are able to build. The classic example of this, is like a Microsoft Windows. Yes, there was Windows, but then there were all the things that people built on it, and it created a whole economy. The iPhone, and all the apps for that, Android, and so over the past decade and a half or so, we've seen the emergence on B2B platforms, things like CRMs, like HubSpot, these ecosystems of people either integrating other specialized SaaS products, into these platforms, or even building apps specifically targeted to extend that particular platform. Right. And so whenever I hear platform, I'm thinking oh yeah, what do you build on? Actually OpenAI with these plugins
Is
That's an
another
example of a
platform.
platform because, yeah, you get to build plugins and add value on top of that. But yeah, it's been fashionable, I think, for a while for people to use the word platform interchangeable with product. So what have you built? A Restream Studio platform. What do other people build on you? Well, nothing, but it's a platform.
Yeah.
I don't want to be picky about terminology, but
Yeah.
any of these software companies, I guess here's the real trigger, is you see it when they have these, whether they're called marketplaces or stores or directories or not, when they basically have ecosystems around their product that feature the other software tools, providers, apps, whatnot that plug into that. If they have an ecosystem of those folks, I think they're a legit platform, and there are a lot of them now.
Is there a danger of a company, a vendor wanting to be a platform, but maybe they have to have certain things in place to be able to be successful at it?
Yeah, well, it's kind of like first and foremost, you have to have, what do you need to be a platform? Well, you need to have the extensibility for people to build on it. And I think of it in software terms, but you can have stuff like, I don't know, like a Canva or something like this where people could create designs or whatnot. I mean, there's lots of ways people can build on top of things, but like you need to actually have the technical openness for people to be able to build things. Then you need to have an incentive for other people to invest in building onto your platform. And largely the first signal for that is like, okay, you have to have an install base. And you have to have an install base that has enough size. And also that install base has very identifiable needs that aren't being served by the core product. Then you're sort of essentially, oh, well, here's an incentive for other companies to build stuff so that they can serve those needs. And then sort of the third and final step of that is you need to create the mechanisms for, okay, how do we have the programs to let people come in, get them certified? Do we have a marketplace? Do we let them do transactions?
Right.
That last piece is sometimes where people think like, oh, well, that's the work, in making it a platform. And actually, out of the three, that's the easiest step.
Really?
If you've got an open, extensible, product people can build on, and there's like a market and identifiable needs, then like, yeah, creating a marketplace to serve that, that is the icing on the cake.
Yeah. HubSpot's platform ecosystem is massive, and it's growing all the time.
We are definitely working on it. It's, I've now been at HubSpot a little bit over 5 years. And yeah, we've gone from, I don't know when I started, we were around like 50 integrations, a number of which we just had to build ourselves to, even get things going. Getting these flywheels started is, takes some activation energy. And I was just looking on the marketplace this morning. I think we are like 3 apps shy of like 1,400. But it's interesting though, because like at some level, when people talk about like the number of apps or number of integrations, in many ways I find, that's a kind of vanity number. It's like the version we used to have with websites are like, how many page views are you getting? What really matters is like, okay, for the apps and integrations you have, do they actually solve the needs that customers want? What's the quality of them? Are people getting value out of them? You can look at things like the retention rate, both the retention rate of people using an app, but also as people start to use certain apps, does that increase their retention rate with the platform overall? What are their satisfaction? These are the things that, total number of apps doesn't really matter. What matters is, are customers happy with what they're getting? Is it growing the business?
Are those the things you think about in your day job? Is that the kind of stuff that you look at and wonder and worry and try to figure out how to make better, kind of improve?
Yes, our North Star was always customer usage of apps and integrations. Now again, like, the number of apps in a marketplace, it's one of those things that externally people look at as a signal, I kind of noticed this in HubSpot. Like when we crossed the 1,000 app mark, there was this, almost noticeable change, externally of like, oh, okay, they're really a platform now. Apparently when we had 999, we weren't. As soon as we had 1,001, we were. So,
Yeah.
I get it. It's a shorthand signal. But yeah, when you're actually trying to figure out like, okay, how do you do something that's meaningful to customers? Number of apps is not the metric you want to align to.
No, I understand. That makes a lot of really great sense. There are so many things I want to talk to you about, so we're going to kind of shift around a lot, and we won't get it all. We probably won't get to it all. But so let's talk right now about low code, no code, because that is a huge growth engine for companies, and that is really changing the way software is built today. Like, I assume that AI and machine learning are helping to drive that market substantially, but what are you seeing in the market?
Yeah, this is another one of these things. Like if you'd asked me this question a month ago, my answer would have been, yeah, absolutely. We've been on this trajectory where, tools like Airtable or Zapier or Webflow or Workato or Bubble. I mean, there's hundreds of these, that make it easy for, again, sort of like the power user personality. You don't have to be a software engineer, but you're the sort of person who might be caught making custom formulas for Excel. Like, okay, yeah, that's where a person. Like, we now give you the tools where you can, in a largely visual way, like, hey, I want this sort of custom database and this interface to it, and I want this workflow that when this triggers, I can execute this action and then that action. And this has been great because for a long time, users were really held hostage to software developers. The software developers who created products had an idea of like, okay, this is how the software is going to work. Here's what you can do. Here's how you can do it. And for most users, it's like, take it or leave it. Like, okay, you have to adapt the way you want to work to what the software thinks should be the way you want to work.
Exactly.
That was fine. The world moved forward. But the advantage of, where these no-code tools have been headed is sort of like, oh, well, listen, the stuff you get out of the box with these tools, that's a starting point. But if you now have ideas of how you want your workflow or a particular user experience for an employee or a set of customers, like, yeah, you can craft your own thing and then have it take the appropriate actions or pipe the right data, across your apps. And so this has been a really exciting movement. The thing that, if you could say anything's limited it, it's basically been, for a lot of these tools, you still had to be a bit of a builder mentality. You didn't necessarily have to be a software engineer, but you had to almost think like a programmer, to pull these things together. And now, just in these past couple of weeks, like some of these announcements with Microsoft, how they've embedded that sort of ChatGPT interface into their own no-code tools like Power Apps and Power Automate. We were talking earlier about the plugins for ChatGPT, and one of the plugins was Zapier. Is it Zapier or Zapier? I always get that. Those folks, the Z company, created a plugin. So like now you've got these things where you look at the demos, or if you get access to the plugin, you can start to play with it. You're just like, okay, listen, I want to create a table with these columns. Can you populate it with some sample data? Oh, actually, can you pull the data from this other thing here? And then I want to have it as a button when I click. And like, you're just describing as a user what you would want. And it's automatically like making this happen. I mean, yes, this is no code at like an entirely different, it's the sort of thing like, yeah, I mean, again, like if you'd asked me this last year, I would have been like, yeah, well, that's the science fiction future. At some point it will be, hello, computer, this is what I would like, And starting to see this stuff actually work this way, I'm going to confess, as exciting as it is, it's a little disorienting.
Yeah. It's like low-code, no-code disrupted software development, and now AI is disrupting low-code, no-code in a major way, but and happening at a much faster stream than anything else.
Yes. And it's fascinating because even for software developers, like, one of the early use cases of this technology, early use cases, it's just like a year ago, was GitHub, the platform Microsoft owns, for developers. Like they'd incorporated some of this capability for what they called, Copilot, GitHub Copilot. So just like as a content creator, you would describe what you would want, and GPT 3 or 4 would write an essay for you. It's that same thing, except you describe what you want, and then it writes Python code for you or JavaScript code for you. And so even for people who are coders, who are true software developers, they're now leveraging these AI tools to do a lot of the actual hands-on keyboard work for them. And then they can tweak or they can adjust. And just like you as a writer, you might, if GPT-4 is generating a draft of something for you, if you're a professional writer, you're probably not going to take that as is. You're going to read through it. You're going to edit. You're going to make changes. I don't like this. It got the order wrong here. Same thing, like a professional programmer will take this code that gets generated and be like, okay, no, I want this different thing here. Let me swap this in there. But it accelerates the process by, what is it? Cuts out 80% of the work in some of these cases. So
I would think it would be more challenging for developers though with code too, because they have to, it's not easy for writers to edit their work, but it's easier because it's written words, it's text. But for a coder, you've got to go through the code stream and you have to figure out where it is you want to change it. Like to me, that sounds more complicated than it would for editing an article or a blog or something like that.
Yeah, and some of it comes down to the scope. So again, right now, I think where these AI assistants are very helpful in code is when you're writing, having it help you with some sort of isolated component. There's a level of, for large software apps, the broader architecture and how those things fit together. We're not there yet with the AI, but this is one of these things where if you were to say okay, well, AI isn't going to do that. I don't know. We might come back in a year and be like, yeah, no, it can do that.
Okay. You wrote the book Hacking Marketing in 2016. I have it here. I was reading it. I took the cover off because I don't like to ruin my covers, but that's it. Awesome book. Do you think anything has changed from then till now, which is that's 6 years, a little over 6 years. Does that approach to marketing for you still hold true? Are there things that you think you would look at differently than when you first wrote it?
I mean, I think the core thesis still holds, which the thesis was the way marketing operates is starting to have a lot of the same sort of DNA of how software development teams had operated. Because, as marketers now, it's not that, I was going to say, it's not like we're creating software, although actually now I guess everyone's creating software, but it's this idea of you've got this digital canvas, and you're trying to create things. You've got users. In the case of marketers, our users are our prospects and our customers, and we want to be able to take things like these iterative approaches to, how we serve their needs and, find what works. And so I think that broad thesis that marketing is very much a software-like digital profession still holds. I think, when I wrote the book, I took a number of examples of, okay, and this is how software developers manage this stuff today. Here's how you might think of adapting that, in marketing. Certainly over, the past 6-7 years here, software developers continue to evolve, their best practices, the way they think about it, and particularly this emergence of DevOps as a concept. So when I wrote the book, agile development was sort of the big thing. That sort of in many ways got displaced by this approach to software creation and, deployment of DevOps. I think the shortest version is there used to be this space between the people who would write software and the people who would deploy software and manage it in the cloud. And DevOps really, sort of compressed and intermingled those.
Right.
And when I think about translating that to marketing, again, it's almost like, I think the closest example I would be is, if you've had these like long marketing approval pipelines of like, okay, this person does this piece, then it gets handed off to this group, and, legal's going to solve it here, and then we send it back to this person. And so that the end-to-end process, could still be quite lengthy.
Mm-hmm.
I imagine, like one of the things I would look at is, the way sort of some of those like DevOps principles, in some way we've been adapting them to marketing in the way in which we get more marketers closer to actual going from thought to production. And then, you need governance mechanisms around that too, just like there are with, DevOps world. But if I was going to write a second edition, I think that would be one of the patterns I'd look and see, like, are there similarities between DevOps and what we think of as, sort of like, modern marketing production?
Yeah. So there's so much happening, so much that you have to kind of marry together and change. And I think the whole RevOps movement is kind of bringing marketing and sales together too, which is another layer that you have to kind of think about how it all works together.
Yeah, we're only one letter apart. There's DevOps and RevOps.
Exactly.
Slightly different, probably actually more than just slightly different on a lot of dimensions. But one of the things I've noticed, though, is like this proliferation of ops, like everywhere in the business. There's like, content ops and website ops and marketing ops and sales ops and rev ops. And, we got security ops and product ops and data ops and ML. I mean, it's all ops all the time. And again, if you think about those ops personalities as being the very folks who tend to be really good at leveraging these like low code, no code tools to be able to like, okay, well, I'm responsible for how all this digital stuff is flowing, within my group. Man, it is a golden age, for people who are in those roles. And hey, marketing ops people should get some credit for being some of the early pioneers on this stuff.
They should, shouldn't they? And I think it's great because I think it's finally more and more an awareness of how important operations are. And operations doesn't mean everything has to be long and detailed and complicated. It means you need people that are focused there, that are making sure things flow very well together. And I don't think that we always thought that way. I think you would just throw people in a room and say, get the software up and running and we'll make it work. And we'll figure it out as we go along. And that's just not going to work anymore because we need to change too fast for that to be like that.
Yeah. I mean, it really is operations in the sense of, like classically, in manufacturing businesses, like operations was a seriously important job. It was like, how does all this stuff actually run? It is the digital equivalent of that. And I think you're right. The way in which these roles came to be, they didn't always get the credit and respect that they should have, when they were getting started. But at this point in time, if you're a senior executive and you're not treating your ops capabilities as like a primary pillar, of your function, you are probably skating on thin ice.
Yeah. The other thing that I think is interesting or is that important for us to recognize is that just because you're in operations doesn't mean that you shouldn't be aware and involved in the strategy and the creativity aspect of marketing. I don't think there should be a wall between those two roles. And one of the things that I try to do in some of the work that I do is bring them together because I think people who are in operations are smart enough to understand the other stuff. And most of the people that do the high-level strategies and the implementation are smart enough and need to understand the technology and how it all works together. Maybe not at the nitty-gritty detail, but they certainly can't just say, oh yeah, I'm just using this and I'm going to assume that everything's going to work out fine.
Yes. Ooh, that actually gives me an idea. Another pattern, if I was doing the second edition of Hacking Marketing, is, there'd been this real convergence in software teams of the triad, that you'd have a product manager, you would have a lead engineer, and you would have a UX, design lead, and that
Yeah.
this would be the triad together with very different skills, but highly complementary. That would really they're the leads, of all these different products, and that pattern is kind of fractal. You have the individual teams of those triads, and then they roll up, and you have senior triads. I think that's a really exciting thing. And I've seen versions of this with pods and tiger teams and all this sort of stuff. But this idea of marrying an ops person, with a demand, generation leader, with a creative, person, and giving them space to collaboratively go after something, I think is, an incredibly powerful pattern.
Yeah. I would love to see some companies that are doing that. And I'm sure there are some that they're doing it. I'd love to kind of see what they've been able to achieve by creating that kind of group of people and letting them just kind of go figure it out. All right. We're coming up close to our time, but and we didn't talk a lot about HubSpot, but I was just, before we kind of close things out, just the work that you're doing, how has it changed since you've started it? You've been there for 5 years, I think you said it was. I remember interviewing you when you first started and how excited you were about it. Are you still, well, obviously you're going to say yes. That's kind of a foolish question, but how has your thinking evolved? What are you looking most forward to as you're working through there?
Yeah, no, it's been an incredible past 5 years. It's funny. I both feel if I may humbly say this, and let me make sure the credit is to a very large set of people. I can't take credit for this, but I'm very, very happy with the progress HubSpot has made over the past 5 years to really become a true platform company. That being said, boy, the things we see ahead of what is still possible, what this next generation is going to be. I mean, the stuff here with AI actually opens up some really interesting, tantalizing ideas there. So yes, I'm still as excited as ever of okay, well, this movie is not over. We maybe got Act 1. Act 2 is going to be wild. I think another thing I've gotten really excited about is, when I joined HubSpot, I was really focused on the tech ecosystem, these product integrations and apps. HubSpot has a whole massive ecosystem around service providers, agencies and consultants. And, for a while, those things were kind of in their own space, right? There's okay, you guys are building products and integrations, and you guys are, providing sales and service and consulting, and, two very powerful things, but they each kind of had their own lane. But increasingly over these past few years, we've seen this wonderful intermingling between these, where it's become some of our best solutions partners who have now started building products for HubSpot and becoming app partners that way. In the other direction, we have these integration partners who end up then collaborating with, our best solutions partners on expanding the portfolios of solutions they can provide, because it's now, it's not just HubSpot, it's HubSpot plus, do you need this specialized thing for, partner management here? Or do you want this, tool to be able to do more advanced configure, practice, quote in these sales org, and so it's you see this exchange of value, this the 1 + 1 = 3, dynamic between partners. It's partners of this kind helping partners of the other kind, and then mutually reinforcing that way. And that's beautiful, because when you really talk about ecosystems, it's not that you want to think of it in these sliced silos. The ecosystem is really everyone who's participating, around a platform like that. And I think that's the thing. Probably looking back, I'm wow, seeing that start to really happen feels magical.
That's great. That's I watch HubSpot carefully, and I'm just amazed with how much it's grown, and from all kinds of different angles over the last few years. And I like the tool. I use it with my clients. I think it's really good.
Thank you.
So you have an event coming up on May 2nd, Best of Breed Marketing Summit. I just wanted to make sure people knew about that, because that's I signed up for it. It sounds like a great event that everybody in marketing, whatever side of marketing you're on, would want to attend. And you're going to announce the new martech landscape at that event. I know you won't give away any secrets, because I can't get.
Well,
I can't twist your arm.
Spoiler alert. It hasn't shrunk.
Gee. Thank you, Scott, for joining me. I think this was a great conversation. Thank you to anyone who's watching on LinkedIn. There were some comments, but they're not coming through on my restream, so I couldn't post them up on the screen like I like to. But thank you for listening, everyone. And thank you, Scott. It's a great conversation. We could have probably talked forever and ever, but I will make sure to put the link to the event in the comments on the replay of the LinkedIn Live. But you can also find it on chiefmartech.com. Scott's got it over there as well.
Awesome. Well, thanks for having me, Barb. Yeah, wonderful to talk with you about all this fun stuff. And yeah, we'll pick up the hours-long conversation another time, I'm sure.
All right. Thanks a lot.